My day is 6 a.m. to noon, and I'm not crazy. You're crazy for thinking it takes 24 hours, just like some dude in a cave did 300 years ago. My second day starts at noon and goes till 6 p.m. That's day 2. And then the next day is 6 p.m. to midnight. What I've done now is I have changed and manipulated time. I now get 21 days a week. Stack that up over a month, I'm going to kick your butt. Stack it up over a year, you're toast. Stack it up over 5 years, my entire life is different than it would have been otherwise.
Well, my day also starts at 6 a.m., but by 7 a.m. I already had one day. By 8 a.m., there's 2 days. By noon, I had 6 days. By 1, I've had a whole week. So by the time you take your lunch after your first day, I already had a week. Stack that up over time, and just like a caveman, that's compounding. By the end of the week, you're toast. By the end of the month, you're a muffin. In a month, I'm so far ahead because I've been stacking imaginary days. You're never going to catch up.
Incredible. All right, well, with that, let's stack up the days here like a caveman would and make some toast and kick things off with the Webflow Show. The only Webflow show on the internet that can show you how to stack up imaginary days. As always, it's your boys, Matt and Hien, here dropping another banger for you today. Not toast, not muffin, a banger.
Absolutely. Just like a caveman, the bangers are just compounding at this point. Like, we've got enough. Over time, there's no YouTube show is going to be able to keep up with us.
Too many bangers, we're kicking your butts.
That's right.
So, if you're feeling the vibes and you want to stack the days like we are, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe for future shows, tell your friends, drop a sub, as a kid would say, and make sure you never miss out on the most fun you could possibly have talking about Webflow, design, and no-code dev. So with that, let's start the show. And before we get into our main event, we're gonna banter a little bit. We're gonna vamp.
All right. Yeah, let's just vamp. Let's wax a little bit. And then
we got time. We have all the time in the world.
We do. And the people have demanded much longer episodes. So let's give them what they want. That's not real. But I mean, we'd obviously be remiss to not talk about the cold open, as usually is our point of emphasis in our bantering section of the show. I thought we should talk about our biggest productivity tips other than the one that we already hit people off. Like, that's an easy one. Getting 21 days in a week would be my first suggestion. But other than that, do you have any productivity tips that you had that are either funny to you or have actually worked? Those are the best ones. We kind of live in a productivity porn world that has just slowly burned out our generation. But are there any that you would like to take with you and actually help you throughout your day, or ones that make you laugh?
Absolutely. The first one is make sure when you're talking, snap that finger at some point, because it's going to make it feel like something was done. Just like that. Boom.
Yeah. And
did it.
Just a note to our producers, if you could add snapping in to after every sentence, people are going to love that. Please don't do
that. So obviously that's a joke, but yeah, go ahead and do that. See what that does for your day. But my productivity tip or hack, whatever you want to call it, that helps me is I got to just think of one thing I need to do that day. Like, if I can get that one thing done, then everything else is gravy, kind of like icing on a cake kind of thing. Just because there's so much to do in a day. I didn't think we've always kind of talked about it where you're more than just this thing. Like, we're more than just web designers. We're more than just hosts of this incredible show. But we have our lives outside of this. So it's a lot to do. So for me, I'm just like, if I can just do this one thing for each one of those things, then the day was a success, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's similar to me. Like, a couple of things came to mind. I actually think you might have said this one to me, or we all discovered it around the same time during the pandemic days. But something that helps me that seems really obvious, but I just never really did. I think this is true of a lot of people who are remote workers or work from home or whatever you want to call it, is having breaks. Obviously there's nothing newsworthy about saying taking breaks, but starting your day with a walk if you work from home, taking a walk around the neighborhood at lunch, just making it feel like there's some dynamics to your day, since you maybe don't have a commute. there's just so much like your mind gets to focus on other things, especially for me, if you can get outside. And then I kind of come back doing much better work. It's like a productivity tip as old as time, but I feel like so few people actually do it, myself included, that I always am trying to remind myself, like, it's really totally chill to take like a 15-minute walk at lunch, and you should do it and your work will actually be better for it. But I think it's so hard when you're trying to stack time and manipulate time like we are, to give 15 minutes away to something that like doesn't get to that one thing you wanted to get done for that day or whatever. But it's kind of one of those like classic traps. So I try to be rigid about those things for myself, and it just makes the day more enjoyable. And I think we're just better at doing tasks when we have other things going on. Like you said, it's like we're more than our task list, and that's an easy way to like remind your brain of that, or at least for me. And the other one is like your one thing. I do that as well, but I have to break the one thing up into like 4 or 5 things, because I'll be like, I'm going to start an airline. This seems relatively easy. Like I'll do that today, you know, with my 21 days, stack that up. Like I'll probably have an airline launch soon. It's like, I just am really bad at picking out that one thing. You know, like building a website is one thing. Building a homepage is also one thing. So trying to get the like right one thing that's reasonable to do in a day with other things going on. So I try to like go down a level from that. And it also like is a nice sense of accomplishment. Like if you're building a homepage, it's like, that's actually kind of a lot of work. But checking off the hero section, like that's the most important part of basically any website, and it looks great. Like that's a really good accomplishment. It feels good to kind of check that off either mentally or physically in your app or however you do it. But like, that just helps me, like those two things help me have like a smoother day and feel a little bit more accomplished. I think especially if you own your own business or something like that, it's like you never are done with tasks. There's an infinite amount of things to do, and it can just kind of feel like otherwise for me, like I'm not really making that much progress. I'm failing my like overly ambitious goal, etc. So if you're kind of wired like that, those two things have been the most helpful for me.
Yeah, no, those are all both really great tips, especially if you're jamming so many days into one day.
Right. Well, it's a lot of pressure to do a month in 3 days or whatever.
Right, exactly. And talking about jamming, we're going to go ahead and jump into the main event here, talking about creative jammers in web design. So, as designers, we dig constraints that spark our creative juices, but at the end of the day, some constraints are like creativity kryptonite. They just actually kill your imaginary stack days. They don't for us, but for you might turn a toast into muffin, into French toast, whatever it may be. They swoop in and they just zap all the creative juices before they can even have a chance to flow. So today we're going to dive into a few notorious constraints that pop up when we collaborate with marketers and how to conquer them like a boss. So Matt, what's the first big bad wolf of a constraint or a jam that's out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that's sort of overarching, the other ones we talk about might even be sort of a subset of this one, is just the fear of sort of breaking your website, whatever that means to you. I think it's somewhat ambiguous because you might be scared of just different things. And like most things that we're scared of, whether it's about websites or not, it's like we just don't know. And it's like a little bit too risky to, just see what happens on something that's like the face of your brand or your website. That homepage is usually real scary, even if you're changing things. And some of it's justified and some of it isn't. But we'll talk about some things today that are like good constraints and bad constraints. Maybe some there should be a little caution around, and that's good, and ones that aren't. But like you don't want your website to feel like you're, the vibes. You're like avoiding your all-time favorite restaurant because your ex still hangs out there. Like that's a weird thing to have around your website because it's just way too important. They need to have a good relationship with your website, knowing what you can confidently do, knowing what you need to hire people for. Like, so I always like to think of it's like, what would make it like less scary to work on your website, and just sort of draw those lines knowingly when we're right at the top when we're designing a website. So if you're not a web designer, you're engaging in a project, the best place to sort of snuff this out is when you're working on the new website. Like, hey, I change CTAs all the time. Like, I need to be able to do this on my own without calling. It's like, there might be 3 or 4 things that you really need to do, and the rest you're fine outsourcing or you're whatever. But it's like, this stuff comes fast. We can't be scared to do these certain things. So just knowing what those are, knowing what those constraints are, knowing where your skills end. But, it does put marketers in a pickle because usually you're not starting from scratch, like where you get to sort of list those things out. So, taking some time, understanding what's going on with your website. Like if you're scared of something on your website, you're scared of breaking something, like get specific with it and try to figure out like what's going on. Is it an issue of, like usually 1 or 2 things, like the key source of sort of like fear or standoffishness around the website usually comes from like 2 main places. One is just the website's designed poorly. So like you can't really trust what happens, right? When you make a change, you're like, I don't know what this photo is going to look like. I don't know if it's going to scale wrong or stretch it. Like, I don't know why that happens. I don't know where the field is to make this change. Worse, there is no field to make that change. It's just hard coded in. Nothing more scary than if you don't know code, opening up code, even if it looks simple. That's pretty daunting if that's not your expertise. So that's the most common one, is the back end of the site wasn't designed with you in mind, you being the marketer, you being the kind of person who's in the website in the day to day. It wasn't designed with those 3 or 4 things you need to be able to do efficiently at all times. So you're in a tough spot there, right? Like all you can kind of do is investigate, what's happening there. But, I always like to come back to that list of things like, hey, if I could do these 4 things easily, whatever those might be, it would change the game for us. We'd be able to get content out faster. We'd be able to test more, etc. The other thing is just your team, your internal team, whatever it is, didn't spend the time to kind of learn where these things are, learn enough about the platform to gain some confidence there. I think that can happen as well when there's a website launch. There's a million things going on, and sort of training and education definitely are not one of the things that fit into your 21 days in a week, your basic 21 days in a week. So like they just get lost, and it's fine because, right, the website's perfect for that first 3 months, that first 6 months, all the priorities that you need to have are designed for. But like no one was thinking about the inevitability of a new product coming out or learning from your audience, these changes that need to be made. And then you're kind of just stuck. Like you didn't watch the training videos, even if you have them, or they don't exist in most cases. So, like I think that can be tough. We're going to hit the people with a major key alert from our guy, DJ Khaled. I still don't know what he does, but he's out there dropping major key alerts. I think when you're reviewing these things and taking this time to review like what you're actually scared about, what you're, unsure about is probably a better word. If you find it's just not a reasonable workflow to swap out a button, to make a landing page, it doesn't feel reasonable for you to be able to line up with the things that you need to do in the business. That's a time to engage somebody and change that. Maybe it's education, maybe it's a new design, but that's how you stack hours, really, not in a bullshit way, but in a real way. A 4-hour task to update something that should take like literally like 15 minutes or less. That stuff hurts. That hurts your productivity. It makes you never want to change your website, even though you should. And that stuff's kind of unacceptable. So identifying those things, and despite every platform's claim, like we're obviously big Webflow heads here on this show. But despite like even Webflow make the claims, it's so easy to do this, you can do anything or whatever. So you kind of have this blind belief that you're now a designer and developer. Even most platforms do a better job at like opening doors to things, but it's still a lot of work. It's still a lot of knowledge. It's still a lot of like knowing how to troubleshoot if something goes wrong. So it's kind of just like that false promise we've alluded to in other episodes. Just making sure that like, what things you really need to own, and then invest time and resources into opening that door to the designer so that their creativity can come up, right? Like they're not just doing buttons. They can redesign that home section, that hero section for you, that you could make better for your users, instead of just these little tweaks and changes that you need to make in real time really quickly and be confident it's not going to break anything. So just understanding what you need to do and then communicating if you need to engage a dev or whatever. Hey, not only do I need the hero changed, I need these things to be possible once it's done. Because that's the stuff that's going to get, the most juice out of your creativity and just your website functioning how it should.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a crazy ass claim to throw out there that you can instantly learn how to design a website no matter the platform. I mean, even when we got into Webflow, like it was a learning curve for you and me, and we are web designers at the end of the day. So it's it definitely is a crazy thing. Almost as insane as saying you can live 2 days in one, or that you can manipulate time. So that was our first creative jammer. What's the next one you have on the docket?
This one's probably the most controversial, but it piggybacks off of the sort of promises that platforms can make. Which is just the inability to change visual design. So you might be working with your creative teams, and you all come up with a really good idea. You really want to change something, and that can be really scary. You may have a good idea. You're like, this could literally increase conversions, right? Like this. But we just paid for a new website 6 months ago. I can't go get budget for that. It starts to immediately feel like, yeah, that'd be nice, but how are we going to do that? I don't even know how to change it there. So it can just immediately feels like a huge task, right? Like you're just like, okay, we'll stack that idea up in our log or whatever, but instead we're just going to change the verbiage and hope for the best.
Right. Yeah, or something like, our background is white here. We would like to use our dark background. That sounds simple, but then now you got to change the button color, the font color. Earlier you were saying, that one thing now becomes a bunch of things, and you're like, well, I don't know how to do any of this, so I guess we're not doing this.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there are a couple of things that you can do that shouldn't feel like that. Even if you're like, okay, I don't know how to change that color or whatever, maybe we have to resource that out, but we really need something to happen in the short term. Assuming you have a decent layout, something that's not totally insane, there are two things that you can always do. And designers and devs probably wouldn't want to say this out loud that often, but it goes a really, really long way to just punch up your copy. The number one thing, just get laser focused. How could your copy connect with your audience better? Could you shorten it up a little bit so it's more powerful on mobile and doesn't go below the fold? They're just questions you can ask yourself. And these are kind of into that good constraint, right? It's well, why are you talking about copy when we're talking about the inability to change visual design? Typography and how your text is laid out is massive, right? We think about cool new photos or some complicated animations or graphic design when we think about visual design. So copy just gets sort of skipped over. You might have copy that's too long and it's down on 3 lines, and if you moved it up to 2, that CTA button's more front and center, right? These are things we're thinking about as designers, but you don't need to know any code or anything there. You can make a huge difference, especially in that hero section above the fold, by just making that copy a bit more punchy, shortening it up a little bit, changing the CTA to something a little bit more interesting. So don't rule those things out. You should not feel constrained to do that. If your website makes you feel constrained to do that, call us. I will just talk to you for free. There are certain things that are unacceptable, right, on your website. It's you now have a billboard. That thing might as well just be hanging over the highway. Whatever you wrote on it is what it is until you take that billboard down. It should not feel like that. The beauty of your website and why it becomes so front and center now is it can evolve organically. You can use new information to make it more powerful without having to, send it to the printer. We should be leveraging that power. And the other thing is upgrading the visuals on the website. Sounds really stupid in a section called inability to change visual design. What we really mean by that is you can go pay money for those stock images if you have the same stock images as everybody else. Couple $100, get yourself 8 photos from the same pack by a professional photographer. You don't even have to hire one. You can really change the way things look and elevate your website by doing that. And that's another thing, Hien, like we see all the time, right? That stuff gets lost sometimes in the budget. You know, like you're maybe already a little bit over budget, you're at your budget, whatever it might be. And it's always a rush no matter what to get it live. Like that's why everyone's photos look the same is yes, those are the free ones, but more importantly, they just got sort of chose the best one at the buzzer. And guess what? Everyone chooses the same 5 pictures at the buzzer because they're the only 5 good photos of someone happily doing business or whatever we're all after. So yeah, so don't be afraid to revisit that. Like take a look at the layout of your website. Like most people are going to have an image in the hero section. You know, most people are going to have an image in the feature section if you don't have custom graphics or whatever. That's fine. These are things you can confidently do. And again, to go back to like, that's a fine constraint. If your layout's fine, you're good to go. You can make a big change with just some new images, hire a graphic designer now that you really know what you're after. Maybe you didn't when you're launching the site. You can change a ton just by doing that on your homepage. Like, yes, we'd love to see matching stuff on every page, but budgets dictate what's possible there. So, you know, make it get the most bang for your buck. But a bad constraint, again, much like the copy is, you don't even know how to go about. You've got the photos, you've got new graphics, whatever. You got Canva Pro and you're just banging out like stuff you're happy with in there. Great. But you're worried about how you're going to be able to put that on the website, how it's going to display. Worse, you don't really know where to go. Like those are not good constraints, right? Like, so again, reach out to your boys, reach out to your friendly local designer. Sometimes it might just be education. You know, like maybe there's nothing there. You just haven't spent time in it, or it's a site you started working on that you weren't there at the beginning. So how would you know? That stuff can really change the game and knock down some of those constraints. And if you hire somebody and they're like, this is a mess, like you've got a different thing, you know, you need to start thinking about that redesign or at least redeveloping again, those 3 or 4 things. You're like, we have to be able to do this. This is ridiculous. You know, let's work on that as our next big project.
Yeah, and I want to like second the visual design thing a bit too, kind of looking about how important this is and why it can be such a huge constraint, and where sometimes the website reality doesn't meet expectations. Is that like, you know, we see it all the time where people come to us with website inspiration, and rather than talking about why the website itself is an inspiration or why they like it, they start talking about like the photography and like the video and the cinematography and all of that stuff as if like we're, you know, judging a best film kind of film festival or something. And all those things are great, but we don't take photos. We're not photographers. We're not Marty Scorsese. We're not making their videos. So unless they have that asset, we're kind of shit out of luck, because we're just going to have a really great badass looking website with some not so badass photos and videos. So like, you know, I just like want to just reiterate that aspect of it, is like you might look at a website and see like, yeah, we want this website, but what is it about that website that you really want? And if it's those videos and those photos, then you got to go spend the money to make that happen.
And you should, like, obviously, like it's easy to say, but it's like if you want a website that just displays like beautiful photos and really like ups your like the visual value and like the uniqueness, it's like that's gonna have to be an investment. Like otherwise you're in stock photo world. But that's kind of the middle ground. It's like you don't have to do a $10,000 photo shoot or free photos. You know, you can buy some nice ones. Like you can get the middle ground for $500 or less or something like that. And you should look for ways to be able to do that. And just to kind of recap, it's like if you feel constrained by your personal graphic design skills because you aren't a graphic designer, that's a constraint to listen to. You're like, we need a new skill in here. But it's not okay if your website prevents you from easily adding new designs, new copy to the site. Like, you should not accept that, and you should make it a major action item to figure out how to change that through education or through maybe needing a little bit of a redesign on the back end. Like we're all enamored with the front end of websites, but it's the back end that matters. When you're just trying to get new content out there. So making sure you understand good constraints and bad constraints there. And you just shouldn't be afraid that you'll easily get confused when you log in and accidentally stumble into the upside down every time you want to swap out a photo. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that should never be the case, and you never should be jammed up like that. Well, let's keep running up that hill of creative jammers. And so, what's next out there waiting to trickerify you like Vecna?
These are all similar. These are things that stop you from having ownership over areas. Content experimentation is another thing, especially for marketers, right? Like you don't know. The best marketers know that they don't know. They're making their best educated guesses about what content's going to work well. What's most important above the fold, what CTA should say, stuff like that. They're making their best guess. So experimentation is the most important thing. So like we'll hear stuff like, oh, the white papers page, we don't touch that page. Like weird stuff happens on that page. And it's just like that upside down feeling we're alluding to, just like, so you have a new white paper, but you can't do this or that with it. There are a lot of things like that people just accept as a part of the like history of their website. It's just like, we'd love to blast out that new white paper, but like we really don't have a way to upload it. We can't display a PDF, stuff like that. Like you need to be able to experiment on all pages of your website. Like if there's a specific page that's failing you, it doesn't feel simple or intuitive to change out that content, or even to move sections around or reuse a section, stuff like that. Like there are differing levels of skill that you need to be able to confidently do those things, but mostly that should be possible with education. If you're getting this can't be done, like of course it can be done, and if it's important to you, it should be able to be done. So those are the things we want to try to find out, and content experimentation is one of those things. You wish you could do this. Like you have a really good idea creatively, like you've gotten literal feedback from your clients that like, oh, they had to scroll down too far to find your features or to whatever, to book an appointment, whatever it might be. It might be easy. Some of these things are like easy in some areas of the site, like often the homepage because people really paid attention to it, but not in others. You're like, oh, I can change the heading super easily. Now I'm going to like dip into the about page and do the same thing. It's like, but that field's not there, right? Or you can do most of the fields on a page. You might not be able to find the ACF field because one field is editable and the other isn't. If things are going well on your site, you should have no idea what we're talking about right now. Your copywriter should never slack you. Hey, how do I update the heading on the about page? Like if you're getting those kind of things, right? Like it's maybe something you want to dive into. So these moments seem trivial again, like, oh, it's like a 5-second thing, but it's not a 5-second thing. Usually that change just never gets made. You go on to your other tasks, right? Like that we talked about that you can actually change. So a page just sort of slowly dies on your website. Maybe it doesn't receive updates. It starts to feel weird. Now your careers and your about page is 10 times more important than it was when you launched your website. So it really matters that it looks weird because you're trying to hire now. Like these things do matter, and they just sort of like weigh you down, those constraints. Like people literally won't bring up that page that's hard to edit just because they're like, I don't even want to get into it. Like I'm just going to talk about the new blog post. Like these sort of secretive things happen because there's an understood language around certain pages or modules or whatever it is on your website. It's like, we'd love to update those logos, but I don't even know, man. Like we just got Nike as a client. It'd be a big boost. We're going to have to like call somebody to do that. It's just like, that sucks, man. You need to get that, out there. That could cost you business, but things do happen that are non-obvious, right? Like these bad constraints, sometimes it's just not talking about them because you already know there's like, oh, the last time we tried to do something there, that was rough. I don't need that. I don't need that this week. So that's the real pain. It's like those things that are unseen. And again, you start to have two websites you're operating at the same time, like the pages that how to edit, or the pages that are easy to edit, and then the other ones. And we've all been to that website that has a banger homepage, and then you click on the next one, you're like, oh wow, this was like a different decade. They literally made this like 10 years prior to the homepage. And that sucks, right? It's a weird feeling. Most people are not doing design critiques on websites, but it does feel, you have that 3 seconds of like, oh, did I click on a different tab? Like this is weird.
Yeah, wait, this is the same website? Yeah, this one's rough, man. Because like I always kind of think back to like pre Webflow only days when we were doing websites like WordPress and other things like Craft or something like that. And they were like, "Can you update this copy for us?" We're like, "Yeah, sure." And you go in and you go to that back and you're like, "Where in the heck is this field? I don't know where this is." And you spend 3-4 hours just trying to find one field. It's like, no wonder people don't update it, right? It's just impossible. And just like, well, this is what it is. And we hear horror stories from like clients who come to us that want to move off of whatever platform they're on because of the fact that like the inability to update their content and copy is jamming up their SEO. They're like, we have no SEO game because we can't update our copy. We've hired an SEO person. We know what words we want to use, but we just can't do it. So we just don't have a website that ranks.
Yeah.
It's like, that sucks. I mean, you've already invested the time and energy to like figure out how to get your thing to rank, but you just can't change it.
You have all the answers, right? Like you just know where the answer sheet is. Like that's such a good one too. And it's another way you can kind of leverage how easy your website is to use. Like let's say you hire a SEO specialist and part of their thing is to go into the website and actually make those updates. If they're struggling a lot with that, like they can't find stuff, like that's also a good way. It's like a third party. Other things we've seen is like the workarounds become so complex. You get like the one person who's figured it out, like how to update SEO or whatever. And it's like, you're so reliant. And it's not even like a skill set. It's just like this individual knowledge of how this like weird website works. Like you can't even like hire a WordPress expert or whatever to find it because it's just like, oh no, like that field's not labeled SEO. It's labeled like something else because we used it for something else in the past. Like sometimes it's just labeling stuff and figuring those things out and keeping things organized. But like those are like insane moments when you're just like, we can't do these basic things. And again, the theme of today's show is like understanding how to leverage constraints for creativity and understanding what constraints are actually jamming you up, like that shouldn't be acceptable to you, that are not like an education issue, that are just like your website is not doing what should be the bare minimum of your expectation. Like that's not cool. It's costing you hours. It's costing your business money. And it's not even like really a debate. It's just like how many, right? And you definitely need to start stacking days. You need to get 6 days in before lunch to catch up with that kind of a workflow.
I definitely remember like a muffin moment where I had to try to update copy and I was like searching and I found the field. It's like, I think this is the field. I see the actual copy in here and I changed it. And then you have to hit the publish button to, and you sweat and no change. It didn't change. You're just like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Like, this is not the field. It's like, I don't know what to do here. Like, this is nuts. But
or the field exists, but it's not connected in the code. You're just like, I'm doing it. I'm saving it. It says it. It says it. It's not on the website. And it's just awful because of course, like, you're not doing these tasks necessarily all the time. So you're like, most people are like, I'm doing something wrong. Like, I don't know how to do this. So now you have this moment of like going to your boss or whatever and just being like, yo, I don't know how to do this task. It might not even have anything to do with you. You might have done beyond anything that you should ever have to be responsible for. And again, like these create moments that really suck. It's like, are you excited to do the following SEO page? That one might work, or it might not. So, again, just keeping those things, keeping a list of those things, asking your team, like, are there any areas of the site you're like worried about updating? Like you're scared of breaking something or whatever in particular? Just start with that basic question. And then again, like there's going to be one of two remedies. Like it's poor design. It's not developed well. The back end doesn't work, or just some education needs to happen. And, those are differing levels of effort, but you've got to get comfortable working in your website to really make it worth it. And once you do that, you'll get more budget from the powers that be, because the website will start to convert. People will actually be able to understand more easily like how these changes matter, other than being like, hey, what'd you guys do last quarter? It's like, well, we updated the SEO. It's not appearing like in reality, but we did do all of that work.
But imagine. Imagine if it did.
Yeah. Imagine a world where like it actually was getting served to Google.
Imagine if I could manipulate time and reality so that it does show up.
Right. It's a pretty penny to bring in that guy, by the way. So like you don't want to go that far down the bad trail.
All right, so it's moving on from inability to update content that's jamming you up to another thing that's jamming you up day and night. What's our final jam?
Yeah, I think, staying on brand is this like big question. It's staying on brand is a good constraint. So it's the first one of these, at least at a high level, of like, if you've established a brand, what your colors are, what things should look like, what types of photos you're using, those types of things, like that's a decision that's probably been made by a lot of people collaboratively over a period of time. And you really should adhere to that, right? Like that's a good constraint. It's like, what can I do within a world where my primary colors are orange and yellow? Like, this is what the brand is. I can't just drop in blue because of, the vibes, right? And this all comes, the need to change this all comes from like, marketers or really anybody working on a website, like the secret craving to do a great job, right? To connect with people on an emotional level, to be unique and different, really stand out. But it can easily go off the rails from a brand perspective. And there's a lot of equity built up in brand, especially if it's an older one that's been around for a while. Like, it's just not the area to sort of tinker, like changing color on a random page to make it feel more friendly, stuff like that. We hear all the time. These are good ideas if that's the tone of the brand, like it fits within the constraints that the brand is. And that's really what a brand is a set of constraints that everybody's agreed on. It's good ideas if it fits that tone. It's bad if you just saw that orange was like the Pantone color of the year this year and you're personally really vibing with it. It's the type of website you'd want to go to. It's like we all want to create that bond with customers that runs deeper than the one between Ross and Rachel, but your business is generally not for you. Like, maybe you're someone who could buy from your brand depending on the type of business, but it's an easy thing to fall prey to. And we do as well. Like, we know all these rules and constraints, and that's why we do multiple versions of brands and things. Sometimes it's like, oh, that was just something I'm really into design wise right now. Or like, that's a shade that's like really trendy and I'm just seeing everywhere, so it feels right. Like, those are the things you want to stay away from. Like, hold it up to your brand. There are, of course, times to do a rebrand. But if you've recently done a rebrand and you already want to toss in some cool new stuff, like, you're killing your brand. You're doing it a disservice. Like, you have to stick with it long enough so that people can make it recognizable. And likewise, how does this tie into a website other than the obvious ways of like, yeah, the colors should be in your brand guide, the typography, and the fonts that you choose should be the ones in your brand guide. Most sites don't come with sort of like a functional style guide even for the website, which is similar to a brand guide, but obviously it's like for the digital world. It's specifically for how, your website displays. Like, your website's different than a poster or billboard, right? It has to fit in these things, but it's being served on all sorts of different screen sizes and things like that. And your designer should be handling that. But like, one thing that we always do for our websites is like, there's always a style guide within the website that helps you understand what everything should look like on your website. Again, we don't think it's great to be like fiddling with that or whatever because they're global changes. But this is an example of like where a constraint is good, or having a little bit of caution around it is good. If you're not comfortable changing a color globally, you probably shouldn't do it, right? Like, like that's just a good key where you're like, people are going to notice if I change the blue to orange. Like, that should be a big flag of like, maybe you have really good reasons for that, right? And then you're having a brand discussion, but that should never be just like an off the cuff thing you're trying, even on a landing page. Like, those are not great things to A/B test because people can hit that landing page and they see blue, and that's the first time they've experienced your brand. So now in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'm going to talk to my boss about this. And I'm like, oh, is the blue one? I know we have a couple competitors. And then you're like, oh, this one's orange when I go to the homepage. Like, it's kind of a weird example, but stuff like that is kind of the reality of how it works. Like we just lock in one element or a piece of copy or something that we remember. Maybe we remember to bookmark that bad boy. Maybe we remember to put in our notes like a good worker, but we all know oftentimes we're just like, oh, I'll remember that. So you just have to be very careful with that. Like people remember these like small elements, and that's really how your brand can build over time and how your website and your brand can work together as a team instead of like your website's a bunch of cool iterations of the ideas that you had and they kind of work. They're kind of based on the brand, but you're also like go nuts creatively. Like that's not really the place for that. So we just wanted to highlight this one as your website should have a style guide that helps you understand what your website should look like, what the constraints are, what the brand is. And also, that's an example of using a constraint well. Like there's a ton that you can do creatively, even if the colors aren't exactly what you like. Like push yourself to be like, okay, these are the rules. This is the typography that we can use. These are the colors that we can use. This is the colors of our button. What can we do? Like, and sometimes you can even use that to make an ad, right? Or make something in print. Like people are usually finding you now on websites. So don't do something like crazy off the beaten path when you're making your conference booth, right? Like those two things in reality play together. People see your conference booth, they go to your website. People see your website, they see that you're at that conference, they go to your conference booth. Make it easy for them. That's the most important thing. Those are the areas where creativity, past a certain point is actually hurting you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that last bit there is really key into like you're not just staying on brand for the website, you're staying on brand for the brand, and so the more that you can stay on brand across the board, then you actually create a real brand, and there's a consistency, and you can grow that brand in a way that makes sense. Because the last thing you want is for your collateral material, like your letterhead or your sales pitch deck, to look different than your website, because then you go to the website, it's like, is this the same company?
Yeah, and it's so weird when they do that. Yeah, it's so weird to do that.
So yeah, but in order for the Webflow show to stay on brand, and for us to keep stacking days like a champ, we should probably take a moment and thank today's sponsor. So let's go ahead and roll that sponsor vid.
Dead air.
All right, that was another muffin there. So we're gonna have to keep stacking days till we get that sponsor. So y'all can help us out here, help us get that sponsor.
My new dream sponsor is like Jersey Mike's or whatever. Danny DeVito actually is a sponsor. It's like it would be great to just keep like a long lineage of like loosely related Danny DeVito sponsors. So we'll take any sponsor that doesn't like morally offend us or the rest of the world at this point. But specifically, if you're out there and you're a Danny DeVito brand, like we're looking to link up and do some sort of a mind share on that front. Let's keep it real Danny DeVito.
Yeah, especially if you're stacking up days the way that we are, we can all be kicking butts like cavemen. And with that, that is our main event today. Just 4 things that are jamming you up, jamming you day and night, jamming until there's nothing left of you to jam. So got to get out of those things. Can't have that for your website. And before we move on to some spicy nugs, Matt's actually been out there like sharing some nugs. We're going to open up a can. And I think I got a tall boy today of a can to open. And it's blasting the idea of website awards. I won't get into kind of how this all came about, but I'll just go ahead and say that neither Matt nor I give a shit about the idea of awards. And I'm not blasting them because we don't have any and that I'm bitter. That's just not a...
I am, for the record. Like, I can't.
That's not what
this is. Pure ego
about.
Thing for me.
But it's just always kind of like that question of like, what exactly is being awarded at the end of the day? Like, what are we recognizing? Like the design of the website, and I think like this can kind of comes in perfect time with like everything that we've been talking about today about these website constraints. Is that like, this website might look like badass, like so incredible, designed beautifully, but it could just be full of freaking constraints that prevents you from doing anything. You kind of think of like a concept car Concept cars can get awards all the time. They look incredible, but they'll never see the light of day. They'll never run. They'll never have an engine. So like, it's just like, what are we awarding at the end of the day? What are we recognizing? You know, so yeah, it's just like that kind of shit.
I love the concept car thing because like a lot of the sites that win awards, you know, concept site is pretty close to what it is, but often they're microsites, you know, something that has like for a movie or for a release or something. It's like, it's a very sort of moment in time thing that doesn't need to be updated. That is not like your main site, or, you know, it's the homepage. And like, as a business, you decide like, this is great. Like, it's totally locked in. We're mature enough to know that we're going all out on this. We really want to make a statement. You know, it's usually stuff like that. Often those sites don't even exist a year later. You know, those links will be dead. And it's not because that design was bad or it wasn't cool. It's just like its use was only a limited time. And often that's the only chances like where you can really flex in those ways as a designer, because you know, like, this is one thing. I'm going to do everything with this one thing in mind. I know that no one else is going to update it other than me, and everyone sort of understands that. And that's it. You know, it's like much like a concept car. It has a purpose, and that purpose is not to hit the production lines. Like, it's to inspire, maybe. It's to show you the, like, craziest version of what reality can be, so that, you know, really it's an inspirational thing. And those are weird things to give awards to, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally. And I think the other thing about it too is like, which is always, you know, because we try to draw inspiration all the time and try to, you know, keep improving our skills, and looking at websites out there that are getting recognized is good for us to see, just to see how we as designers, maybe there's something that we can be more incorporating into like our toolbox kind of thing. Not necessarily like, oh, I aspire to have this website that has the most insane parallax that it slows down the website so much that when I'm scrolling, it takes literally 30 seconds for it to follow me. I think we both have found that a lot of these like site of the days, they like break a lot of like functional rules that make a website usable. And it's going to only, again, lead to more constraints. So yeah, it just kind of goes back to that again. It's like, what are we actually awarding here? Like, this is an unusable website.
Yeah. And I think an easy way to tell too is like, whenever I'm, you know, I think the reason this is a great open the can segment we go off on forever is like, we talk about it. Like, some places want us to have awards, not like maybe even they want to nominate us. But what I mean by that more is they are like, hey, have you won awards? Like, it's just like a question on their, you know, questionnaire list. So it's like, we know people want to see them, and I understand the premise of it, but anytime I'm thinking about building an award-winning website in the ways that we're talking right now, I'm like, well, we would just sort of have to do this for ourselves. Like, maybe it's just a product we make up, or like in that, it's like back to the concept car. It's like, it's a concept car. I'm fully confident in our ability to build some things like that. And I think it would be a ton of fun. So it's not bashing it in that way, but it's like, I don't think our client base at least would have the appetite to run that site. As much as they might love it, they would almost have to hire us or whoever developed it, because, you know, with great complexity on the front end often comes quite a bit of complexity on the back end, and a certain level of skill to sort of operate a thing just like anything else. So, you know, it's just, unless you're like aiming for the award, it's sort of hard to serve both audiences. You can kind of serve the people who vote on awards, and you can also hopefully find a happy ground and make an operational site for your clients. But it can be hard to do both, because they aren't really the same aim. They're sort of, they have disparate paths at some point in the process where you're like, which one of these wins? Do you want to be able to use your website, or do you just want us to go like nuts and be like, hey, like, brand X has an award-winning website? It's like, that's fine, but that should be the type of thing you're specifically after, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like, a lot of these awards, like, they're just so purely an aesthetic thing, but they don't account for the functionality of a site, like all the backend, all the technique that needs to go into make this website usable. You know, I kind of like think of like a few random things that come to mind. Like, I think I've always kind of mentioned like, I've always liked a Barracuda, like a 1971 Barracuda. Like, that would be like, I think it's a beautiful car. It would be like a dream car, but you and I both know it's not a functional car. It gets like 8 miles to the gallon because it weighs like 20 tons.
It's a tank, almost literally.
And,
yeah.
and it's not safe. Like, if I ever got into a car accident, like I'm dead. Like, there's just no safety behind it. So, you know, it kind of like, it's like, yeah, this thing looks great, but it's not going to serve a real purpose. And then the other thing that I think about too is, like, you know, we both like furniture. Like, the Barcelona chair by Van der Rohe is award-winning. It's beautiful. It is the most uncomfortable chair I've ever sat in my entire life. I can't sit in there for more than 30 seconds. It's so poorly designed as a chair. And he's my favorite designer. I love Van der Rohe. And I hate that chair. I would never, even if I had all the money in the world, I would never buy it. And if I did, it's just going to sit there, which is going to be the worst thing, right? It's kind of like going back to this website stuff. It's like, it's just going to sit there. It's going to be unusable. It's just there just to say I have it, you know, right? And it's like, is that really like what we're trying to award here? Like, is that really what's important? Like, I want people to be able to use the website, both the people who are buying the website from us and people who are visiting that website. And, yeah, I think like these awards are just so stupid at the end of the day, and they're so pointless. And as being two movie guys, like, you know, I think we both recognize that one of the so quote unquote greatest movie of all time is Citizen Kane. And I think, you know, most people have heard of this movie, especially if you're a movie person, and you wouldn't be wrong to assume that it won an Oscar for Best Film in 1941. And the reality is, it didn't. It did not win the Oscar. The movie that did win it, One Foot in Heaven. No one said, I've never seen that movie. I didn't know it existed. You probably didn't know it existed. And the craziest thing about it is that, yeah, we don't know this movie that won an Oscar. The best part about this is that I am totally lying. It actually did not win the Oscar that year.
I'm like, did you make up One Foot in Heaven? Is that even a movie?
It actually is a movie. It was nominated.
It should be if it's not.
The movie that actually won was How Green Was My Valley by William Wyler. But for 2 to 5 minutes, whomever is watching this is like, oh, One Foot in Heaven won the Oscar that year. It beat Citizen Kane. Actually, it was How Green Was My Valley. And I'm also lying about who directed that, because it wasn't William Wyler. It was John Ford. Again, a legendary director. Both of them are legendary directors. But I think if someone was like, oh, Citizen Kane was directed by John Ford, most people who know anything about movies, but that's not right. That's Orson Welles. But we could have just lived this lie for this rest of this video, and people would have been like, oh, How Green Was My Valley? That was directed by William Wyler.
I learned that on the Webflow show. It's like, don't get your movie facts from us.
Yeah. but yeah, I mean, like, I think this is kind of the you know, like a random little microcosm of this, and I think this whole like could be literally an episode of the Webflow Show, just shitting on this idea of like awards. But you know, a website doesn't have to be award winning to be something that has a legacy, that's inspiring, that can be basically the website that when people are like, oh, what websites inspire you? Like, this is the website. It sets the standard. And if it's setting the standard for your industry, for your peers, like, and it doesn't win an award, it's not getting a blue ribbon like PBR, like, that's not bad, right? I mean, like, so.
I mean, that's why PBR is well known as the greatest beer ever made, I think, as well, because it got the blue ribbon. They put it, you know, you can't make that up. Yeah, and at the end of the day, for me, like, this always comes down to, like, I think words are always tricky because, like, success is only defined by whatever the people who made it were setting out to do. Like, if you made the most beautiful site ever with the worst back end ever, but the goal was to make, you know, like these complex integrations on the back end to help drive sales, which is obviously much less sexy to do, but we all got lost into a creative art exercise. Like, we could win an award from a site that's grading on those things, but it's like we would have failed by a mile because we put all the resources into the wrong spots, right? It's like, well, I know you wanted this to integrate with your CRM, or I know you want to be able to control your site pages and products through Airtable or whatever. But it's like, hey, we ran out of budget there. We're like, but that's what we like hired you to specifically do those things. We're like, right, but site of the day though. It's like most people don't give a shit about the site of the day or even know what we're talking about when we say site of the day. And I think that's a good thing. Like, but there should be some other way to measure it. And I think often it's like, well, there should be some sort of goal at the end. Like these 3 things will be true at the end. It doesn't have to be some grandiose mission statement or anything, but it's like there should be some things that are false now that we're trying to make true by the end of the project. And if you knock all those out of the park, toss your Huck Finch boys out there for an award at whatever. I don't care. But it's like those are the things that I'm always thinking about, and those change from project to project.
Right. Yeah. One last sip of this can before we move on to our nugs is that like it's worth mentioning that like not every website that comes our way is like not good looking. We had a lot of websites that have come our way that are aesthetically nice looking. Their problem is always the back end stuff of like I can't update it. I can't rank for anything. It's slow. There's speed issues. I just can't update it at all. Like these are all so like having a website that looks really nice isn't the end all be all. I mean that's usually what any of these awards are about, is that they're going to look nice, but eventually you're going to come to us because you're going to like, I can't do anything with this website. So yeah, like I said, we can go off on this tall boy for a while and probably should do a full episode about it, but we're going to go ahead and just like crush this can and we're going to move on to some nugs. So now that we made this an entire episode about blasting website awards, we're going to dive into our nugs. Matt, you got a nug for the good people out there?
Nominate us for a website award. We'll drop all the links in the show notes. We're trying to get those awards up. We want to be we want the most awards, I think. And again, we're just going to, we're working 21-day weeks here. If anyone deserves an award, it's obviously us. But if not, we'll just invent awards and award ourselves those. That's probably the easiest way. To get back to the constraints thing, because I think that's the theme and really what's important to take away from this episode is like we have the beliefs that constraints are honestly maybe the best thing for creativity, but that's sort of it's a quote. I think it's relatively famous. I don't know who said it, but not all constraints are created equal. So we wanted to take some time today and really sort of tease out things that you should find unacceptable about your website. Like don't get comfortable with not being able to do certain things on your website. Like back to the awards conversation, right? It's like we should get an award if those things if it's easy for you to operate your website, leverage the creativity of your team without us sitting in the room with you, like making it 80% easier than it used to be. Like those things are like really, really important. So we want to be able to identify some constraints that are good, some that are not good, and how to kind of work creatively within those. There's some bad constraints out there that are jamming you up. And again, like just take those away. Like we see a lot more websites than the average internal team because it's all we do. And there are some that we find unacceptable. And this is sort of our episode to scream those out loud as much as you can. Be like, no, that should not be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a couple of nuggets. I think my first one connects to what you just said. Like there are some bad constraints out there. And you may not even recognize them, just like you said, because you're not dealing with websites on a reg like we are. But you can start to kind of tease those out, one, obviously by going through and watching this episode. But you can then also ask yourself, like, what are things I have to update on the website regularly, on regular intervals, actually. So you can kind of think about it. It's like, what do I have to do daily, weekly, monthly, maybe quarterly, annual? It's like kind of breaking down these milestones or whatever, what needs to be done. Kind of catalog those things and kind of make sure can I actually do these things? Like a year from now, am I going to remember to do this thing? If you don't, then you might find that you have a lot more constraints that are going to jam you up than not. Some of it could just be easy things like I just need to document this because I'm never going to remember it anyways, no matter what, even if it is easy. So make documentation, Loom videos, whatever it may be, and just kind of think about if I needed to train somebody else how to do this, can I do that? And yeah, it's just a kind of a good way to kind of just looking at it and be like, man, if half these things are just impossible for you to do, like you probably should look at a new website. Like it's never going to work out well for you, because like if all of a sudden that thing that needs to be done monthly, all of a sudden your boss is like, I need you to do it now, and you don't know how to do that, you don't look good. Their website's not going to look good. Your company's not going to look good. Like
I don't know how to use our $50,000 website is like a really uncomfortable answer to why things aren't getting done.
Yeah, I got to remember that somehow. The other nug is, going back to the brand thing, is that like you've already touched on this, but just kind of just reiterating that staying on brand is hard, but it's a good hard, right? Because it's a constraint. Because in order to continue to like keep your brand thriving and living, you have to make sure that it's represented correctly, but you shouldn't make it harder on yourself than it needs to be in order to keep that brand consistent. And what makes keeping a brand hard, especially as two guys who do branding as well, in addition to kind of creating Webflow websites, is that PDF brand guide. That's just not serving anybody any good. It's just collecting digital dust somewhere in your Google Drive or your Dropbox somewhere.
That's that's my ASMR thing. Stay tuned for no more of that ever.
Yeah, they're unusable. They're impossible to kind of really decipher. They're really long. On top of that, they're not even made for regular people to use. They're made for like designers who even know what the hell is going on here, right? So that's not going to help. So our recommendation is to, if you can, do what we do, which is create that digital style guide, and have it go beyond just purely like, these are our colors, these are our fonts, but allow it to be a living and breathing like brand guide that can change over time, especially as your brand evolves. You might decide to like, hey, like we want a more colorful, like playful font over time. Enter is not hitting that. Let's go with something like Hasser. You could update on that website, and then that could be the source of truth for everybody in your company to go to make sure that they're using the right font, or to know what the hell like color hex to use if they're looking for like, what is the color hex for Bondi blue again? Just go to the style guide. It's right there, and it's always going to be, up to date, hopefully. But it's a possibility for you to keep it up to date. That PDF one is going to be really hard for you to keep up to date.
Yeah, there's versioning issues and things like that. Even if it becomes this whole like management piece, and this is just a way to do it. And I think the cool thing about like a website style guide, obviously you can put into it whatever elements you want, but generally it's the things that allow people that are not designers to like quickly look at and visually sort of understand how things should look and feel. And also your website, if driven by these rules and these good constraints that we're talking about, will be the best example of how your brand should look. Like even on a one pager, right? Like, of course, there's different design things that you need to accomplish in different shapes or goals or whatever it might be. But everyone can kind of like more through osmosis understand, like, look at our website if you're trying to get a sense of like how things should look. Like if someone tasked you with making something in Canva because you don't have an in-house designers or whatever, like our website's a really reliable place to go to get a sense of how the thing should look. Look at the photos that are there. Look at the type that's there. Like, do we use bold stuff a lot? Just like without thinking about it, you can go to it and just kind of look at it. And like, if you have any sense about like how you would like to lay things out or whatever, it's a decent thing to take cues from. And if you're getting nothing, like hand it off to your like person who likes to like make stuff. It's like maybe it's not your jam, but I just think it's like you mentioned, it's a more accessible way to get a sense of what the brand should look like and how it's presenting itself. And it's also another like back end test for if you don't feel comfortable saying that out loud, at least for your homepage, it might be time to update that homepage, right? Like it should be a prideful part of your brand. Because if it's not, like your end users are going to, we feel it even if we don't know exactly what's happening. Like you can tell what the effort is and what the intention is of a really good homepage versus an old one or one that's been kind of sold for parts here and there.
Yeah, you can go full ham with a style guide and turn it into a full like design system if you have a product. You can see all the buttons, all that stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of like value in it. So we recommend doing that if your website allows for it. If not, tell you what, Webflow allows for it. So holler at your boys. We'll create that style guide for you.
Yeah, maybe we should do an episode on that. Like if people want to see that or anything else other than ASMR, I don't even know if the initials are in the right order. Please let us know. Like we want to do tactical stuff that helps, and we think that style guide might be the best thing, but a lot of people might not know what that is or understand how they can use it. So let us know if that'd be an interesting episode. That'd be fun to dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. So those were 3 nugs for you today to complement the jam fest of an episode that we had. So, and with that's it. We got another episode in the can.
Yeah, that's right. Banger drop, stacks on stacks.
Stacking bangers.
And again, like this is probably 4 episodes because I've manipulated time. So well done. We're done for a while. Just kidding. We're gonna keep making these on the regular time scale. I think that everyone abides by.
Yeah, whatever that is. We've been manipulating time so much, like it's hard to know like how often we're doing this and when we're doing it. So, in order to stay on track of it, though, you can subscribe to the channel to make sure that when we are not manipulating time, we're dropping bangers and you're checking out those bangers. And you made it to the end, so just do it. Don't be lazy. Just hit that subscribe button. We need this. Like the video. Yeah.
A GIF of Danny DeVito is our sponsor. So we just want to know people are out there listening to this, I think, more than anything. So as much as we joke about the sponsor, subscriptions let us know which episodes we're heading the right direction on. So it'd mean a lot to us to do that. And I think before we drop off, like probably going to turn this into a podcast soon. So you can take them Huck Finch boys to go, take that Webflow show to go. So stay tuned for that if you're more of a car podcast listener.
Yeah, exactly. So do it. Subscribe, like it, ask questions, comment, share it with all your other buddies who would like this stuff. So at some point we'll be back in your face.
Right. See you soon.
So do it.